everyone. Hi everyone, welcome to our fourth lecture. Today what we're going to be talking about is a really fascinating movement in European history and culture called irrationalism. It comes into Europe starting around the 1870s, and as suggested in the name, it's the idea of mankind is very irrational rather than rational. Okay, like in the other lectures, I expect you to do two of the terms I'm going to give you, like a paragraph each, placing the terms within the context of the overall lecture. So look at some of the connections there, or the way that the term demonstrates or goes against some of the other aspects of the rest of the lecture. So you would want to pick two of the terms and write a paragraph each. And then I would also like you to do another paragraph, this one paragraph response to something that one of your classmates has to say about one of the terms. Okay, our terms for the irrationalist movement are, okay, first of all, irrationalism. IRRATIONALISM. That's the first term. Second term, Henri Bergson. HENRI BERGSON. Third term, Friedrich Nietzsche. FRIEDRICH. Last name Nietzsche, and notice that's how it's pronounced. It's Nietzsche, not Nietzsche, just like you shouldn't call the car a Porsche, or you probably don't deserve one. Anyway, Friedrich Nietzsche's last name is spelled NIETZSCHE. Our next term is Übermensch. UBER-MENSCH. Next term, Sigmund Freud. SIGMUND, and last name Freud, FREUD. Okay, now looking at irrationalism. So irrationalism, as suggested in the name, is looking at the idea that mankind is essentially a lot more irrational than he is rational. It's going against a movement in European science called positivism. So positivism, Positivism, positivism is the belief that basically science has the answers to everything. And irrationalism is an opposing movement that says mankind is essentially a lot more irrational than he is rational. That what you see about mankind, what you see about people, their rational side, which is basically the way they want to present themselves to the world, excuse me, is a small part of what they really are. That what they really are is irrational, out of control, and you can't really understand them. They don't even understand themselves. Freud gives us the example of an iceberg. Okay, so when you think of an iceberg, what do you see? You see a small part of the iceberg above the surface. The majority of the iceberg is beneath the surface. So it's the idea that mankind, what you see is a small part of who they really are. Okay, so this new belief in irrationalism starts coming into Europe in the starting about the 1880s, and the first irrationalists. Well, before we get to the first irrationalists, let's just think about irrationalism in general. Okay, now would you say what's your opinion? Would you say mankind is more rational or irrational? Well, think of your choice, and then think, why would you say one way or another? And that's certainly something you can discuss, and you want to look at irrationalism as one of your discussion questions. All right. Well, we like to say we're rational, logical, empirically based, but are we really? All right, think of many decisions we make in life. We eat, drink, and smoke things that we know are harmful to us, sometimes all three. We know the dangers in doing that. Does that mean we stop doing it? Or do we say, no, I really want that chocolate cake. I know I'm fat already, but I'm going to still eat it because it's what I want. Well, is that a rational choice to make, even if we know it's going to make us heavier, more likely to have diabetes, cause heart problems, probably die younger? No, it's a pretty irrational thing to do because it's not like we don't know the knowledge or a choice to smoke cigarettes. They've known for, over 50 years cigarette smoking is dangerous. Did that stop people? No. We know economically cigarette smoking is, very wasteful of money. It's not like a pack of cigarettes is 50 cents. So you're spending a lot of money, and particularly if you're smoking a lot. But do we say, well, no, I'm going to give it up or just not start in the first place? No. People start smoking cigarettes. So is that a rational choice? No. So why are we doing this? Why do we make these decisions? Okay, or even think of something, important in most people's lives. Falling in love with someone and forming a life with this special person. Okay, do we know the people we're really attracted to? Do we know why we're attracted to one person over another? Is the way we see someone the same as the way other people see that person? Do we even see the person in the same way? When we're in the infatuation phase and the person seems perfect. When you try to express that infatuation to somebody else, are your friends going to say the same thing about that person? Probably not. They're going to look at the person more rationally. You're emotionally involved and you're going to act very irrationally. Now think of, how wonderful it would be if, with our use of technology, we could use it to find the perfect person. Wouldn't this be worth a lot of money if you went to, Tinder or eHarmony or Match.com and, you gave them your money and you were truthfully put in 100 aspects of yourself and you put the importance of each in, order, and then what you're looking for in the other, also 100 things and, in order of importance, then it could, go through the computers and it would, ideally find you the perfect person. Well, if that really worked, wouldn't that easily be worth a lot of money to spend? Spend it, now or spend it later in the divorce lawyer. But the fact that it doesn't work and you're not any more likely to find someone that way, what does this say about us? It shows our irrational side. We don't understand ourselves. We don't understand our motivations. Okay, so the irrationalists are going to argue that we are essentially a lot more irrational than we are rational, that what we show to the world is a small veneer of who we really are. Now, the first of the irrationalists is going to be the French irrationalist psychologist Henri Bergson. So Henri Bergson, our second term, Bergson, the French irrationalist psychologist, he argues that mankind is led by instinct, intuition, and drives. That these are what make mankind act the way that they are. That makes mankind make the decisions that he does. Well, let's think for a minute. What is an instinct? What is intuition? And what's a drive? Okay, instinct. Instinct is kind of a gut feeling. Now, we've all had gut feelings, or haven't we had opinions about people without really knowing them? Sometimes you meet a person for the first time and you just really like them. Now, if you've known them a while, you can make an assessment and say, hey, I like them or I don't like them, and here's why. But does it make much sense to really have a strong opinion about someone you don't really know? No, but we feel it all the time and we act on it all the time. What does this say about us? It's saying how, our instincts, these just gut feelings, influence how we act. Or, think about, for example, the feeling of deja vu. It's feeling, wait a minute, I know I've seen that person before. I know I've been at that place before. Now, logically, wait a minute, there's no way I saw that person before. They've never been to the United States. They're from Australia. I've never been to Australia. It's impossible. Or how could I feel I've been to Montana and not remember a trip like that? But then there's this feeling, I have met that person. I have been to Montana. And it kind of, upsets you, kind of takes over. So once again, what's happening? It's going to be the irrational side, these really intense feelings without any base. Instinct, similar kind of thing, just a basic gut feeling. What about drive? This idea that you're driven towards something, this intense feeling that's pulling you towards something. Now, what's the most, the strongest of the drives? Sex. So this desire for sex with one particular person, or, one person over another person. So once again, you're driven that way, and these are going to often be irrational. Okay. So just some examples of the kind of things that we see in Bergson. All right. Now, another irrationalist is going to be Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, Nietzsche is a very famous, much more famous, for example, than Bergson. Now, Nietzsche is another one of our terms. Friedrich Nietzsche is a German irrationalist philosopher. And probably the thing that people most remember about Nietzsche is, well, one thing, the difficulty of spelling his name. I know for years I had a little trouble with it. But no, is actually that what Nietzsche has to say about God. Well, does anyone know what Nietzsche has to say about God? It's pretty famous. Nietzsche says God is dead. Now, that's different than saying there is no God. He's not saying there is no God or there was no God. He instead says God is dead. What he means by that, he says basically it doesn't matter if God is dead. We need the same kind of leader that we used to have in gods today. But he says what has replaced God in the modern world is going to be what he calls the Übermensch. Okay, our next term. So the Übermensch, Uber means above, Mensch means a human being. Literally translated basically as a Superman. Okay, now the idea of a Superman or an Übermensch is basically going to be what replaces God in the modern world for Nietzsche. Okay, so Nietzsche is talking about the Übermensch and replacing God, this Übermensch. So let's look at what the Übermensch is like. So he says what will replace God in the modern world is this Superman. But here's how he kind of describes the Übermensch or the Superman. He said this Superman, this leader, should be or would basically best be someone who is intuitive, instinctive, emotional, but also rational, brave, and strong. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about gender. Which of the two genders is basically seen as the more intuitive and has better gifts of understanding mankind, better understanding man's emotional makeup? I think we would all agree it's going to be women. One of the greatest criticisms that women have about men, this works better when I ask people in the class to say it rather than just coming from me, but if you ask women, what's some of the strongest criticisms they have about men, they're going to say that men are unemotional, that they can express emotions and don't express emotions. Now, a woman can tell that a man's upset She, naturally tries to find out what's wrong so she can help him deal with the problems, and they can, hopefully solve the problems together. What's the reaction that she's going to get from a typical man? Uh, he's going to say, "I'm fine, everything's fine, nothing's wrong." So very, stoic and unemotional and cold. Okay. Now she knows this is nonsense because she can read in his face and by his emotions and his responses that he is upset by something. Now, why is the man not going to express his true emotions? Well, what's he going to be called by others if he actually expresses his emotions? Are these characteristics seen as feminine or masculine? Um, okay, so think of how boys are socialized, how to act. Okay, a boys in little league gets hit by a fastball, it hurts a lot. What's he expected to do, and what's he not expected to do? Well, the last thing any boy is going to do in little league is start crying and whimpering. Well, why? This would make him feel better. He's in pain. Why can't he express his pain? Because if he does, he's going to be called a sissy, a wuss, various other names. Well, what are these words basically saying? They're saying you were acting in a feminine manner. And most, boys are not going to want to be, seen that way. So they learn to walk it off, keep it to themselves, hold their emotions in. Well, how healthy is this and how natural is this? And do these emotions go away, or do they just manifest themselves and get beneath the surface? Okay, so we all agree that women, or at least should agree that women are better at expressing their emotions than men. All right, and then you ask men, what is some of the biggest criticisms they have about women? Okay, and men are often going to say they talk too much, they express their emotions too much. It's always I feel, and it's never I think. So one sex is shown as very emotional, and the other one is very stoic. Now, what characteristics is Nietzsche talking about there in the Übermensch? Well, he's saying that basically the leader of who should replace God, the best kind of leader, would be have the characteristics of both sexes. So they would be emotional like a woman and emphatic and able to sense and feel things. He would see this as a gift that would help a leader, but at the same time also be logical, brave, make rational decisions. So he's saying the best blending, the Übermensch would be the blending of the male and the female characteristics. But in doing so, he's also saying that mankind is irrational. Now, why would this be a better leader? Well, does it make much sense for half of the population, which are women, to have a leader that has no characteristics and nothing in common with them? Or would the best leader be able to have the best parts of both sexes and combine it? Now, what's kind of interesting is around the same time, there's an early theory of homosexuality called the theory of the third sex. Now, the theory of the third sex says that there's actually three sexes, not two. There's men who desire women, there's women who desire men, and then there's men who desire other men. Well, who's being left out of this understanding? Of course, women who desire other women. But remember, it's a male-dominated society, and there's all this misogyny that we talked about before, and this idea that there's this, constant battle of the sexes between the men and the women. So they're kind of ignoring the existence of lesbians. Okay, now let's talk about the most famous of the irrationalists, and that is going to be Sigmund Freud. Okay, so Sigmund, or really, most of us would probably pronounce it Sigmund Freud. He's very famous. He's considered one of the three most influential thinkers in the whole 19th century, along with Darwin, who we talked about in an earlier lecture, and then Marx, who we've talked about since the beginning of the semester. These three thinkers are the ones who most changed how people understood themselves and understood the world around them. All right, so let's talk, in this lecture about the background of Freud, and then in the next lecture, we're going to talk about Freud's ideas themselves. All right, so let's talk about Freud's background. First of all, Freud is Jewish, and think about the three thinkers, the three greatest thinkers of the 19th century, Freud, Darwin, Marx, not necessarily in that order. Well, what do two of them have in common? Well, Marx and Freud are both Jewish. Darwin is not. Who are the most outspoken of the three thinkers? By far, it's going to be Freud and Marx, but not Darwin. And there's a reason for this. Darwin was a wealthy man. He was the pinnacle of society. He was established, and he had a lot to lose if he came up with the very unpopular opinion about evolution. So what did he do? He basically kept it to himself for 20 years. Freud and Marx were Jewish, and being Jewish at this time period basically meant you could never make it to the top. There was strong anti-Semitism in the society, so it basically said that the highest a Jew could rise would be kind of the second level, and even that was very unlikely. So with less to lose, they were much more outspoken. So they're going to say exactly what they think. They'll say it. They don't care if it's unpopular or not. If it's what they believe, they're going to say it, and they're going to be very aggressive in saying exactly what they think. Okay, so Freud. Freud was a Jewish irrationalist psychologist, actually a psychoanalyst. He starts the psychoanalytic movement, and he's very associated with the beautiful old world city of Vienna, Austria. Now, Vienna, Austria is kind of a combination of New World and Old World. So lots of Old World traditions, but at the same time very innovative and up to date, and definitely had the cool factor. Some way it reminds me a little bit of Boston. Boston has a great respect for history. Boston's definitely an historical town that really keeps up their historic district. But with all the universities and great thinkers in the area, it's also a place of ideas. So it's not bound by its traditions. It celebrates them without being constricted by them. Same thing with Vienna. All right, so Freud is there in Vienna, and Freud's going to come up with these very unpopular ideas, very challenging ideas, very radical ideas. Okay, Freud is an example of what we call a dual conflict theorist. Okay, we're going to make that another term. So dual, D-U-A-L, conflict theorist, T-H-E-O-R-I-S-T. Well, what makes him a dual conflict theorist? A theorist who's interested in looking at two different conflicts. Basically, all of Freud's writings were based on the idea of conflicts between two different things. Okay, he's still, unlike Marx, we talked about Marx before. Marx, what's the conflict that Marx sees in everything? Well, those of you who answered class, you're right. He's always talking about social class. We talked about that, remember, before the break. Class in itself, class for itself, class solidarity, class consciousness. Everything to Marx is a conflict between the rich and the poor, or between the capitalists and the proletariat. So he's a single conflict theorist. Freud, however, is a dual conflict theorist. Okay, one conflict that he looks at is the conflict between the conscious self and the subconscious. So that which is above the surface versus that which is beneath the surface. Okay, so that's one conflict. The other conflict that he talks about all the time is going to be a sexual conflict. So Freud is very open about sex in a time when sexuality was very forbidden. Most people in Freud's society of the late 19th century would never talk about sex. You wouldn't talk about it with your best friend. You wouldn't talk about it with your wife. You wouldn't talk about it with your parents, your doctor, your psychologist. There was nobody you could talk about it with. Now, as we know today, partly because of Freud, I think most of us, or all of us, accept we're strongly sexual beings. Sex determines who we're interested in, what we like, who we remember. So all these kinds of things are a big part of how we identify ourselves and others. Okay, so today we're a highly sexualized society, but at Freud's time that's something innovative and different, and he was very outspoken about it. So he's looking at the conflict between the conscious self and the subconscious self, but then also between what you want to do sexually and fantasize about doing sexually and dream about doing sexually, and what you are able to do sexually, what the society allows you to do, what is morally acceptable. So he's looking at these various conflicts, and we're going to explore these conflicts and some of Freud's ideas in our next lecture.